Hey, I'm back again with chapter 5, The Art of Listening in the Mary Kay Way book, the leadership training book. Let's listen. The art of listening. All through school, we're taught to read and write and speak, yet we're never taught to listen. But while listening may be the most undervalued of all communication skills, good people managers are likely to listen more than they speak. Perhaps that's why we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth. Don't undervalue the ability to listen. Some of the most successful leaders are the best listeners. I remember one in particular. He had been hired by a large corporation to assume the role of sales manager, but he knew absolutely nothing about the specifics of the business. When salespeople would go to him for answers, there wasn't anything he could tell them because he didn't know anything. Nonetheless, this man really knew how to listen. So no matter what they would ask him, he'd answer, "What do you think we ought to do?" They'd come up with a solution and he'd agree and they'd leave satisfied. They thought he was fantastic. He taught me that valuable listening technique, and I've applied it ever since. One time, an independent beauty consultant came to me to discuss her marital problems. She asked my advice as to whether she should divorce her husband. Since I didn't even know the man and hardly knew her, there was no way I could give her advice. All I did was listen, nod my head, and ask, "What do you think you ought to do?" I asked her that several times, and each time she went on to tell me what she thought she should do. The next day, I received a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a lovely note thanking me for my terrific advice. Then, about a year later, she wrote to tell me that her marriage was wonderful and that, again, my advice had been credited. Many of the problems I hear don't require me to offer solutions. I solve most of them just by listening and letting the involved party do the talking. If I listen long enough, the person will generally come up with an adequate solution. Many years ago, a friend of mine purchased a small manufacturing company at a bargain price. The previous owner said, "I'm glad to get rid of it. My employees have become very militant. They just don't appreciate all I've done for them over the years. They're going to vote for a union any day now, and I don't want to deal with those union people." After becoming the owner, my friend conducted an open meeting with the total staff. "I want you all to be happy," he told them. "Tell me what I can do to make that happen." As it turned out, he only had to provide a few minor conveniences: modern bathroom fixtures, larger mirrors in the locker room, and vending machines for the recreation area. Those were the only things they wanted. As a result, the union was never voted in, and everyone remained content. All they really wanted was someone to listen to them. Listening is an art, and the first tenet of the skill is paying undivided attention to the other party. When someone enters my office to speak with me, I don't allow anything to distract my attention. If I'm talking to someone in a crowded room, I try to make that person feel as though we're the only person present. I shut out everybody else. I look directly at that person. Even if a gorilla were to walk into the room, I probably wouldn't notice it. I remember how offended I once was when I was having lunch with my sales manager, and every time a pretty waitress walked by, his eyes would follow her across the room. I felt insulted and kept thinking to myself, that waitress's legs are more important to him than what I have to say. He's not listening to me. He doesn't care about me. You've got to pay attention to hear what the other person is saying. Without discipline and concentration, our minds wander. People also can be distracted by their own petty prejudices. For instance, a person may use profanity or some expression that you don't like, or perhaps you are irritated by a certain accent. I know Southerners who can't stand a New York accent. I've met New Yorkers who feel the same way about a Southern drawl. Consequently, they allow something this insignificant to distract them from the value of another person's thoughts. Everyone has seen jokesters who get together to exchange stories. No sooner does one tell a joke than the other person matches him. Neither one listens to the other because they're both too busy getting their next joke ready. At some point, each of us has failed to listen by restlessly awaiting a turn to speak. Often people feel uneasy whenever there's a pause in the conversation. They feel compelled to rush in and start talking. Perhaps if they would remain quiet, the other person might clarify or provide additional information. Sometimes it's good for both parties to keep quiet for a few moments to think. A conversation interrupted by silence can be a welcome relief. In fact, nonstop conversation may be an indication that something is seriously wrong. Many managers make the mistake of creating a boss-employee relationship between themselves and their people, like student to teacher. However, while it is true that a teacher generally stands at the head of the class and does most of the talking, a good teacher also knows how to listen attentively. So does a good manager. To play an authoritarian role with a subordinate, establish a we-they adversarial relationship. Effective communication breaks down and nobody listens. Sometimes listening by itself may not be enough. Some people must be prodded if you're to find out what they're thinking. But a word of caution, be subtle, or you'll come across being intrusive. Sometimes a thin line separates invasion of privacy from concern and interest. With this in mind, when I sense a problem, I'll ask a question or two and then be quiet for a response. Some time ago, for instance, the work habits of one of my executives, who I will call Bill, began to falter. He had always submitted his reports promptly, but for several consecutive weeks, he had been arriving at the office late, and at a committee meetings, he had contributed very little, all of which was very uncharacteristic of him. One day, while he was in my office explaining why a report was late, I decided it was time to have a heart-to-heart talk with him. I stood up from my desk and walked around to pour him a cup of coffee. "How do you like your coffee?" I asked. "Black would be fine." I put his cup on the table in front of the sofa and sat down. He automatically sat down beside me. "Bill," I said, "you're one of our key people, and you've been with us for 12 years, and I feel like we've become good friends in that time." "I feel that way too, Mary Kay," he said in a soft voice. "I'm concerned about you, Bill. You've always been so conscientious about your work that we've become to depend on your contributions, but lately you haven't been yourself." He didn't respond, so I stopped talking and took a sip of coffee. He seemed tense, and I offered to pour more coffee for him. "No, that's all right," he answered. "Is something wrong at home?" I asked. His face grew red, and after a few moments, he nodded his head. "Is there anything that I can do to help?" He proceeded to tell me how upset he was because his wife's doctor had discovered a tumor in his upper back, or in her upper back, his wife's upper back. And he had wanted to tell me because he knew it was affecting his work. I'm certain it was necessary for him to release his bottled up feelings, and we must have talked for over an hour. He seemed to feel much better at the end of the conversation, and later his work improved immensely. While I didn't solve his personal problem, it was good for the two of us to talk about it. Just how far a manager should go in discussing an employee's personal problems is something only the individuals involved can determine. I don't think a manager can work with a person day in and day out and not develop some sort of personal relationship. Of course, you must use discretion at all times and never pry. If you do ask questions and you are subtle about it, you're expressing a genuine interest in what the other person has to say. A doctor who asks you a lot of questions shows that he cares about your health. But a doctor that seems too busy to ask enough questions to diagnose the problem gives you the impression that he really doesn't care and he's only interested in sending you a bill. Tell me, when did you first begin to have that pain in your stomach? A caring doctor asks. What were you doing at that time? What did you eat before you noticed it? Have you ever had this before? Does it hurt when I touch you here? How about there? By asking these questions, he not only learns enough to diagnose and treat the problem, but he also demonstrates his concern. At Mary Kay, every person in the company knows that he or she can bring a problem to my attention at any time. When we were a very small company, I had a close working relationship with everyone in the organization. In those early days, it was easy to listen regularly to what each person had to say. But now, with so many independent beauty consultants and company employees, it's physically impossible to always listen in the same way. Nonetheless, each person is just as important as the next and must be heard. Our solution is to impress upon our leaders through continual training that listening will always be a top priority. Your own organization can be an invaluable resource for ideas. Today, our large independent sales force is an invaluable resource that we tap in for new ideas. We continually communicate with independent beauty consultants, encouraging them to let us know what's happening from their point of view. Most of the independent sales directors, for example, publish monthly newsletters or updates. Many of their ideas are included in the company publication, always with credit to the originator. The independent sales force constantly gives us feedback. We get hundreds of ideas each month. Although we can't possibly use every one of them, we do express our gratitude to them for sharing their thoughts with us. The highest position in the independent sales force is that of independent national sales director. Here too, listening is a priority. The most effective communication mechanism for this group has proved to be a series of smaller advisory groups. At such meetings, we ask these groups to review ideas and offer strategic solutions. Because the independent national sales directors are constantly meeting with independent beauty consultants and sales directors, they're able to provide us with valuable information. It's encourage feedback. It's very important to encourage people to give you feedback, but when you do so, you must abide by these 3 rules. Listen to what they say, acknowledge all correspondence sent to you, and give proper recognition for all valid suggestions. By listening to people in the field, we are able to develop products that are a direct result of the demands from customers. Consequently, our product development is different from that of cosmetic firms that don't have the advantage of this same kind of feedback. For example, let's say XYZ cosmetic company decides they want to bring in a whole new eyeliner. After they manufacture it, they give it to their marketing people and say, go sell this. Then they advertise it on television, create lavish in-store displays, order saturation mailings, and so on. They attempt to create a demand for their product after it has been created. The independent sales force tells us our customers want this size compact. Our customers want this shade. Our customers want a lip brush to do this and this. And by listening to what the consumers want, our research and development groups introduce products that are consumer driven. When we add a new waterproof mascara to our product line, for example, it fulfills a demand consumers have expressed to the independent sales force. But we aren't set up to listen that closely to our sales representatives. I sometimes hear other company executives explain. If a company with hundreds of thousands of independent beauty consultants can listen, so can every other company if its leaders really want to. I knew one national sales manager who called each of his 35 sales representatives at least once a week. Constant communication with the sales force kept him abreast of what was going on in the field. Another sales manager with 40 sales representatives made 25 random calls to his people each week. "How's it going?" he might say to them in a friendly way. "What can I do for you? If you have any questions, just ask." Both made it perfectly clear that they were never too busy to accept a call. At times, they were not available. Each made a point of returning every call from the salespeople before going to sleep each night. Although many companies have the opportunity to listen to their sales force, they fail to do so. A very successful life insurance agent once confided in me that his company totally ignores what its field representatives tell the home office people. I don't even bother to make suggestions anymore, he told me, because they don't pay any attention to what I say or any other agent has to say. Every time I'd express an idea for a change, our marketing people would say, "You just stick to selling and let us worry about the kinds of policies we offer. We have all kinds of experts to design policies. Don't even waste your time thinking about it. You do your job and we'll do ours." Not only was this insurance company short-sighted in not availing itself to some potentially good suggestions, but in the process, it was also hurting the morale of its sales force. I believe that failing to hear what your people are saying indicates gross negligence in a manager. It's not a difficult art to practice. Your people will let you know what's happening if they know they can count on you to listen. And that ends our chapter. Can't wait to discuss it with you.